January 17, 1940, Felixstowe, Suffolk Coast, eastern England. The North Sea air hung heavy and bitter, a raw canvas of grey promising nothing but endless drizzle. Below, the mud flats were iron-hard with frost. Above, in the pre-dawn gloom, the lonely drone of a single engine signaled a fleeting trespass. A Heinkel He-111 reconnaissance bird of the Luftwaffe sliced through the maritime air, its crew supremely confident. They were charting the enemy's coastline, counting ships, photographing port defenses, feeling the exhilarating freedom of unchallenged air supremacy. The so-called phony war had bred an arrogance. The British Lion seemed asleep, its defenses antiquated, its skies open. The German crews, hardened veterans of the Spanish Civil War and the swift Polish campaign, saw Britain as an island ripe for the plucking, a soft target guarded by outdated biplanes and the ghosts of empire. They expected sluggish defenses, surprised reactions, and easy evasion. They expected to see the entirety of the British coastline laid bare, a target map waiting for the ink of invasion. But on this freezing morning, something invisible watched them. Tucked away from the coastal towns, silhouetted against the bruised sky, stood a skeletal, impossibly tall structure, a web of steel rising 360 feet. It was ugly, industrial, and silent, a monstrous modernist sculpture dedicated to the unseen. From its wires, energy pulsed, invisible, unheard, a shockwave of electromagnetic force sweeping over the frigid North Sea, brushing the skin of the Heinkel. Inside a small bunker-like hut at the base, a handful of young women, members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, were hunched over a flickering green cathode ray tube. A small, luminous bump, a blip, skittered across the screen. The moment was deceptively simple, yet it held the entire future of the war in its breath. This tiny dancing green line was the first pulse of the secret nerve network that would render the vastness of the English Channel shrinkable, the movements of the mighty Luftwaffe predictable, and the defense of the realm quantifiable. This was the moment the aerial war transitioned from guesswork and human sight to the precision of physics and the certainty of mathematics. Britain, a nation that in the 1930s still relied heavily on outdated technologies and the romantic notion of the fighter pilot, understood that the next war would be fought in the air. Their historical context was a deep, existential dread, the fear of a lightning-fast aerial knockout blow delivered by Hitler's rapidly rearming war machine. The memory of Zeppelins and Gotha bombers in the First World War haunted the collective imagination. Britain needed a shield, a bulwark, something that could see through the clouds in the night. The initial quest was almost mythical, the search for a death ray, a focused electromagnetic weapon that could instantly incinerate enemy pilots. It was a fantasy rooted in desperation. But the brilliant mind assigned to the task, the physicist Robert Watson Watt, swiftly dismissed the ray as impractical. He proposed something far more profound, not a weapon to destroy, but a tool to see. He reasoned that if radio waves could be made to bounce off the metallic skin of an aircraft, the faint echo, or radio detection and ranging, could reveal its distance, speed, and trajectory. In February 1935, on a field near Daventry, a demonstration was held. A BBC shortwave transmitter was aimed at a Handley Page Hayford bomber. The primitive receiver struggled, but there, unmistakable on the screen, was the blip, the echo of the airplane detected miles away. The death ray was dead. Radar was born. The British government, realizing they had stumbled upon a defensive system that was cheap, scalable, and potentially revolutionary, committed vast, immediate resources. They understood that every minute of warning time was worth a squadron of fighters. The project, codenamed Chainhome, CH, rapidly transformed from a scientific curiosity into a massive, industrial undertaking, a physical manifestation of Britain's resolve. By the summer of 1939, just as the clouds of war darkened Europe, a string of these silent sentinels, the 360-foot transmitter arrays and the 240-foot receiving towers, stretched from the Isle of Wight to the Firth of Tay. They were deliberately ugly and impossible to hide, a frank declaration that physics was now the first line of defense. The Chainhome was a fixed, immovable barrier of energy, designed to guard the nation's most vulnerable perimeter. This was the first great emotional contrast the war would deliver. The German air crews, the Horrido of the Luftwaffe, expected to face an enemy organized by antiquated methods. Spotters with binoculars, unreliable acoustic mirrors, and slow telephone lines. They had been trained on the doctrine of blitzkrieg, speed, shock, and total air superiority achieved before the enemy could react. They expected to fly at high altitude, enjoy the panoramic view of their targets, and turn for home before the scattered, confused RAF could even get off the ground. What they actually experienced was a phantom opponent, an enemy that seemed to know where they were before they crossed the coast. An uncanny precision that defied logical explanation. A German squadron sent to test defenses over the Channel would find RAF fighters waiting for them, perfectly positioned at altitude, sun behind them, ready to pounce. This happened again and again, with alarming regularity. The pilots' initial cockiness curdled into confusion, then paranoia. They knew the British did not have adequate searchlights or a sophisticated spy network that could report every sortie immediately. Their flight paths were often random, their targets variable. Yet the British seemed to possess an omniscience in the air. Was it a secret signaling system? Was it a traitor in the heart of the Luftwaffe Ministerium? The psychological impact was profound. The hunter suddenly felt hunted, their initiative stolen by an unseen force. This growing dread stood in stark opposition to a symbol of the future, a taste of the industrial and ideological might the Germans were truly fighting. The American Hershey bar. It was a small thing, a simple square of milk chocolate, but it represented everything the totalitarian state did not understand about democratic abundance. In the coming months, these small bars, shipped across the Atlantic as personal comforts to American volunteers in the RAF, would begin to appear. They were abundant, manufactured with a speed and quantity the resource-scarce German economy could only dream of. The Hershey bar was proof that across the ocean, a system existed not merely to build bombs and tanks, but to produce limitless, cheap, high-quality comfort, a measure of peacetime excess that suggested a bottomless well of industrial capacity, ready to be weaponized. The Germans expected to defeat an exhausted Europe. They never comprehended the industrial leviathan waiting in the wings, whose simplest products, like this chocolate, symbolized an unstoppable, affluent system. The Luftwaffe's high command, still in denial, launched a specific campaign against the chain home stations. They correctly identified the tall towers as something important, but tragically, they fundamentally misunderstood their function. Assuming they were simply powerful communications jammers or direction-finding beacons, the German bombers tried to destroy them. August 13, 1940, Adler Tag, Eagle Day. This was the designated beginning of the sustained German air assault aimed at destroying the RAF, Operation Sea Lion's prerequisite. The Luftwaffe threw massive formations across the Channel. The historical evidence of the ensuing battle is clear. The chain home network was the eyes, and the Dowding system, named for Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, head of Fighter Command, was the brain. The chain home stations fed their raw, pulsing data, the blips, directly into a central hub, the filter room at Fighter Command Headquarters, Bentley Priory. Here, the noisy, often confusing signals from multiple stations were synthesized, compared, and translated from electronic echoes into human language. 100 plus approaching Dover, heading north. Height 20,000 feet. This refined information was then fed in real time to the operations rooms, where WAFs used long wooden rakes to push blocks representing enemy formations across huge, illuminated maps. The data was so timely that the fighter controllers, sitting in the heart of the bunker, could see the German raid forming over France, calculate its estimated time of arrival over the British coast, and order only the minimum necessary squadrons to intercept, conserving precious pilots' fuel and aircraft for the next wave. Squadron leader Peter Townsend, a Battle of Britain ace, later documented the transformation in tactics. Before radar, we scrambled blind, reacting to sightings that were often too late or inaccurate. With the chain home system, we were meeting the enemy 10 minutes early at the optimal altitude, having conserved our fuel for the fight itself. It was like fighting with a crystal ball. The contrast in expenditure was staggering. A German pilot might use 15 minutes of fuel to reach the British coast, engage in a dogfight, and return. An RAF pilot guided by CH would only have to spend 5 minutes of fuel to climb, position himself, engage, and land. The chain home network allowed the RAF to violate the fundamental rule of combat mathematics. It allowed the smaller force, Fighter Command, to always bring enough strength to the crucial point of engagement. This was a direct function of the warning time provided by the silent towers. During the critical period of the Battle of Britain, the German attacks on the Chainholm towers were catastrophic failures of strategic intelligence. They succeeded in damaging several key stations, Ventnor on the Isle of Wight and Dover being notable examples. But the damage was always localized and temporary. The British crews, primarily civilian technicians and dedicated military personnel, worked tirelessly, often under direct fire, to get the receivers and transmitters back online within hours, sometimes minutes. They were protected by concrete bunkers and their work was essential. The system was redundant, meaning the loss of one station merely degraded the network. It never blinded it entirely. Most crucially, the German command, operating under the mistaken belief that the key target was the actual control rooms and airfields, pivoted their attack. Hermann Göring, infuriated by the RAF's persistent presence, made the single most devastating strategic error of the entire campaign. He ordered the Luftwaffe to shift its focus from the fighter airfields and radar sites to London. This pivot was the definitive transformation brought about by the Chainholm. By diverting the assault to civilian targets, Göring gave the RAF fighter squadrons the breathing room they desperately needed. The airfields were repaired, the ground crews rested, and most importantly, the pilots who had been flying 3 and 4 sorties a day were given a chance to sleep. The Chainholm, though no longer guarding the physical airfields, provided the crucial early warning for the defense of the capital, allowing night fighters and ack guns to be directed and civilians to take shelter. The Chainholm had transformed the British narrative from one of inevitable vulnerability to that of an impregnable electronic fortress. The nation, which had been terrified of aerial knockout, discovered a technological edge that made resistance viable, possible, and eventually victorious. The silent waves were an expression of British ingenuity, a refusal to surrender the skies. As the Battle of Britain subsided and the Blitz began, a period of relentless night bombing, the radar war evolved. The initial Chainholm system, operating on the long wavelength of 10 to 13 meters, was excellent for high-altitude detection over the sea, but it struggled with the clutter and precision needed for night fighting and low-flying aircraft. This challenge spurred a frantic technological arms race. The British were forced to move the electronic battlefield airborne. They developed the Airborne Interception AI radar, miniaturizing the technology to fit into the noses of Beaufighter and Mosquito night fighters. This was a huge step, relying on the Chainholm to guide the night fighter into the general area, and the AI radar to make the final, deadly lock-on. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Hershey bar symbolism gained new weight. The U.S. was not yet formally in the war, but the seeds of technological collaboration were being sown. In 1940, the Teasard mission carried Britain's most precious technological secrets to America. Chief among them, the designs for the cavity magnetron. This device, small enough to hold in your hand, could generate high-power radio pulses at a far shorter wavelength, the centimetric radar range of 10 centimeters. The magnetron was an absolute game-changer, but its implementation required a manufacturing capability beyond anything Britain could muster alone. When the U.S. entered the war, American industrial abundance was fully unlocked. The seemingly limitless capacity that churned out millions of Hershey bars and every other consumer good was instantly converted to military production. Factories that once made refrigerators now made radar components. The magnetron was mass-produced by Bell Labs, transforming the device from a scientific curiosity into a ubiquitous weapon of war. This centimetric radar enabled the creation of high-resolution, shorter-range radar systems like H2S, which allowed bomber navigators to see targets through the clouds using ground mapping, a capability the Germans would not achieve until the very end of the war. It was the original long-wave Chainholm that provided the foundation of knowledge, but it was American industrial power, the power symbolized by the ubiquitous, affordable comfort of the chocolate bar, that provided the means for its ultimate decisive evolution. The industrial output was so vast, so overwhelming, that it became a weapon in itself, a technological tide the resource-starved Reich could never turn back. The Germans, trapped by their own early electronic intelligence failures and the relentless pace of Anglo-American innovation tried desperately to catch up. Their countermeasures, codes like Corfu and Dresden, were always one, sometimes two, generations behind. The great German scientific minds were often diverted to fantastical, ultimately useless projects like the V-weapons, while the Allies focused on the practical, scalable, and immediately effective electronic battlefield. This led to the second, deeper emotional contrast felt by the German airmen. In 1940, they felt invincible, defeated only by superior luck. By 1943 and 1944, their emotional landscape was one of persistent, unsettling disadvantage. They realized they were not fighting an equal opponent. They were fighting a systemic technological superiority, born of a fundamentally different kind of economy and ideology. When a German pilot approached the target over Britain in 1944, he was now facing Chainhome, still providing the broad, overarching early warning, GCI, ground-controlled interception, radar guiding the night fighters with extreme precision, H-2S oboe radar, allowing Allied bombers to find targets in total darkness. Window chaff, massive clouds of aluminum foil, the ultimate electronic countermeasure, rendering German ground radar screens useless. A tactical victory achieved only because the original Chainhome had demonstrated how essential radio waves were. The German pilot, seeing his instruments flicker and his ground control falling silent, experienced a creeping horror. He was fighting not just the enemy, but the very laws of physics warped and weaponized against him. The vastness of the German war machine, built on rigid centralized authority, was undone by the decentralized, collaborative, and innovation-driven system of the Allies. The apex of the Chainhome's transformation came not in a dogfight, but in the greatest act of strategic deception in military history, Operation Fortitude for the D-Day landings. The original Chainhome towers and their subsequent upgrades became central to convincing the German High Command that the invasion was coming at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The British used the lessons learned from listening to their own radar echoes for years to create synthetic echoes. Small, fast boats were equipped with highly sophisticated electronic jamming equipment and reflective surfaces, meticulously mimicking the radar signature of a massive invasion fleet heading toward Pas-de-Calais. The Silent Sentinels, the same towers that detected the lone Heinkel in 1940, now helped fabricate an entire phantom army. The Germans, relying on their own increasingly desperate radar systems, saw what they were conditioned to believe: a huge, non-existent fleet. They held their panzer divisions in the north, waiting for the feint, while the real invasion hit the beaches of Normandy. The historical evidence is conclusive. The success of D-Day rested on the electronic deception, and the electronic deception rested entirely on the foundational knowledge gained from the Chainhome network's initial silent warning blips. The network was not just a tool of air defense. It became the ultimate tool of strategic intelligence and manipulation, a 4-year, coast-to-coast lie that saved countless Allied lives. The final epilogue links this unseen battle to the ideological divide. The story of the Chainhome is not just a triumph of engineering. It is a profound reflection on the nature of freedom and abundance. The German ideology demanded conquest, resource acquisition through force, and a rigid, centrally controlled scientific effort dedicated to the projection of raw power. They built tanks and rockets. The Allied effort, fundamentally rooted in the democratic capitalist ideal, was different. It allowed for the messy, collaborative exchange of ideas, such as the Tizard mission, which traded the magnetron for an abundance of American manufacturing capacity. It was an ideology that tolerated the existence of simple comfort, the ubiquitous Hershey bar, available to every American soldier and, eventually, every liberated citizen, a testament to a system that could produce both the precision magnetron and the affordable square of chocolate, without sacrificing one for the other. The secret network of radar towers stood, and stands today, as a monument to unseen vigilance. It was the ability to see the enemy coming, to quantify the threat and prepare with time and precision, that made the difference. The Germans never truly understood the silent waves tracking their every move, because they fundamentally misunderstood the power of the enemy they were fighting, an ideology that allowed scientists, engineers, and factory workers to innovate collaboratively, scale globally and defend a small island nation with nothing more than the laws of physics, amplified by the promise of abundance and freedom. The echoes of the Heinkel's engine faded from the screen, replaced by the faint shimmering blips of history, forever marking the point where the vastness of the sky was finally conquered by the certainty of science.